Hey guys, welcome to a video on creating your Angular web application. We'll be creating a single page application. With this, you'll have the user interface for your project. The first thing we'll need in order to get started is actually Node.js. This will provide the engine to run your UI on or serve from, especially when you're getting started and you want to see what your UI looks like. To get started, get the 10.9.0, the latest version of Node.js, and it should include NPM with it, the Node Package Manager. Once you have those two things installed, you'll be needing this, Angular CLI, a command line interface for Angular essentially. Here are the commands you would need to use. Well, don't worry about the others at the moment. The first one you really need is npm install -g at angular/CLI. Don't worry too much yet though. I'll be showing you step by step on how to get started setting up the application. This CLI tool will make it really easy to get started. It provides us a skeleton project in order to get started with a demo page, handling the routing, and a lot of the really common code which you would need in a Angular application. Alright, so from your terminal or command line, the first thing you'll need to do is make sure that you are within the overall project folder. So the one layer beneath this would be the server folder that we created so far. Once you have Node.js and npm installed, you should be able to run the node command. So try doing something like this, node space -- version, and you'll see the version of your Node.js installation. You can do the same thing with npm if you'd like as well, and it would tell you the npm version. Now, in order to create the skeleton for our user interface, you will need to do ng. Well, first actually, you'll need to say npm i-g and then angular/CLI, just like what we had in the Angular CLI page over here. npm install, well, you can say install or you can just say I, and then -g to say it's a global scope, and then at angular/CLI, which would be the package you're trying to install. So npm i-g at angular/CLI, and once you install that, you'll be able to use the ng command. You should be able to use it from anywhere, given that we are installing this package on a global scope. Otherwise, it would usually be on the local scope. Okay, so now that I have Angular CLI installed, try ng new. Since this is for the Bar Beer Drinker project, I'll just shorten that to let's see, Bar Beer Drinker UI. And we'll also need a routing flag, so make sure you have this at the end of it, space -- routing. And with that, the utility will automatically create everything that's needed to have a very simple application just saying hello. And okay, now that the project is kind of set up in terms of the skeleton, you'll see the folder, Bar Beer Drinker UI, and within there's a couple files already created, including the source folder, which would have the actual application code. So outside that, you have some configuration files, such as the angular.json, which, which has the configuration for the CLI. And then there's the package.json file, which contains the dependencies. So all the different modules that you install, the packages that you add for your front-end application, it will be noted down here. And then even if this node modules folder is deleted, you can recreate it easily by just saying npm install. Let's see, what else would there be? Well, within the source folder, we have the app folder, and that's where the application code goes. Environments folder will have some additional configuration properties. And outside of that, there's not much else you need to touch over here. So let's see what the application looks like right now with the skeleton code. From your terminal, go into the Bar Beer Drinker folder, or Bar Beer Drinker UI, and try doing ng serve. What this does is it utilizes Node.js to create a light web server and serves your application in real time. So as you make changes, they'll show up on the browser. So this way you can quickly see, oh, what would happen if I change this one line here or something else over there. Okay, so compiled successfully. There's no errors. We can check this out now. Over here, it says go to localhost 4200. So localhost 4200. And here's what it looks like. Welcome to Bar Beer Drinker UI. There's the Angular logo, and then here are some helpful links to get started. If you are unfamiliar with Angular, I highly recommend you look over the Tour of Heroes and also the Angular documentation website, which is located at angular.io. From here, you can go to docs, tutorial, go through the tutorial, look at the fundamentals. A lot of your questions might be answered from just skimming over the fundamentals and techniques. You don't necessarily need to worry about the techniques section though. If there's any question you have or anything else, at the end of the day, you might end up on this website or Stack Overflow when it comes to working with Angular. Now, let's see. If you were to change something in the HTML over here, like adding some text, then when you go to it automatically refreshed the page and it added class. There's nothing I had to do additionally. So here, watch this. If I remove and I save the file, then the browser automatically refreshes and the CLI just recompiled what was necessary. So that is Angular CLI, and we'll be using this in order to create our front-end portion of the application. There is one other thing missing before we really start coding, and that will be Bootstrap. So to get that, we'll need to go to getbootstrap.com, and if we go to download, there should be instructions right here. So npm install bootstrap. Here, I'll kill the CLI and use the same terminal, but that's what it would look like, and make sure you have the save flag just in case. Now, one warning we get here is Bootstrap requires jQuery, which is not installed. Same goes for Popper.js, and yeah, so let's get those as well. npm install save jQuery and Popper.js. And we'll need to add all of these things to the Angular JSON file so that they get loaded in when our application is compiled. So to do that, open up the angular.json file. And go to, let's see, yeah. Within the build section, first thing we'll do is add the scripts. So that will be node modules / and we need to know the path for our jQuery, Bootstrap, and everything else. So for jQuery, that would be right here. Node modules, jQuery, distribution folder, or dist, and then jQuery.min.js. Additionally, we'll need popper, so PQRS, P is over here, popper.js. And from there, so that's popper.js. And last but definitely not least, we'll need to have Bootstrap. So for Bootstrap, make sure you get the distribution folder and then the JS folder within there rather than the outside JS folder. And now we'll also need to have the style sheet. For that, node modules / bootstrap / dist / css / bootstrap.min.css. And one last thing, instead of just the bootstrap.min, try to get the bootstrap.bundle.min.js for our scripts section. Okay, so with that, if we look at our UI again, take a look at what it looks like first before we have Bootstrap. And now, when we do ng-serve, once the front-end code is recompiled, you'll see that the font changes and it just looks more aesthetically appealing. With Bootstrap, what will happen is a lot of the CSS classes will already be there for us. So we can quickly create a grid system, or utilize Bootstrap's grid system rather, have a navbar with different elements, a drop-down menu, and these different types of sections already, because Bootstrap will be included in our application. So now when we go to the UI, here's what it looks like. So the font automatically changed because now Bootstrap is applying its own styles. Okay, so from here on out, I'll actually have the screen split so you can see the changes that will be made while I have the code over here. The first thing we're going to do is we'll need to have the navbar for our application. So to do that, go to getbootstrap.com. You can go to the documentation section and search for navbar. And let's actually use the well, if you want, you can use the dark navbar. The only difference is really a couple CSS classes. So I'm going to click copy over here to get the navbar and paste it into the beginning of our app.component.html file. And if I were to save this right now, here's what it would look like. So as you can see, it automatically created this application, the navbar. And there seems to be an error, so let's see what's going on. Unexpected token. if this error comes up, it should be resolved using nothing more than just restarting the compiler. So ng-serve. Oh, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, to get this view, you just need to right-click, click Inspect, and go to Console. Or you can press F12 on Windows. It's still not opening. Let's see if getting rid of the bundle and instead just having the min.js helps. Now, since we made a change to the angular.json file, we'll actually need to restart the Angular utilities ng-serve command. Let's see, if we get rid of popper.js, I wonder if that will do the trick. Okay, so that was it. We actually don't need popper.js. We'll just make sure that we have bootstrap.bundle.min.js. And with that, our mobile responsive navbar actually expands and collapses. If you have this window maximized, you'll see the normal navbar with the main icon, which we'll put here, or some text, and then each menu item representing a page. Okay, so with that, next thing we'll need is a large section for our main announcement. So we'll be using something called a jumbotron. It's used for showcasing primarily, and we'll make sure it's the fluid jumbotron. So let's copy this section and paste that into here. Make sure you get rid of all the old stuff from the app.component.html file except our navbar and the bottom line, which is the router.outlet. That we'll get to a little bit later. And now, here's what it looks like. So here's the changes we've made so far to the app.component.html file. We copy-pasted the navigation bar from Bootstrap's website, and we copy-pasted the jumbotron. We left the very last line for the router outlet, and everything else from the old code that was generated by the CLI has been deleted. And with that, we have a working navbar and the jumbotron section, and it looks nice. But it's not exactly the content we want, is it? So let's get on that. First, we will get rid of the navbar label that's coming up over here. So to do that, just get rid of navbar and say bar beer drinker. And we'll get rid of, we'll only leave 2 menu items for now. Okay. Now for the jumbotron, we'll need to replace this fluid jumbotron text with welcome to bar beer drinker. Whoa. And let's explain this. So I'm going to turn word wrap on so you can see all the text in the file. And this will become, just some general message. This is a demo application to learn how to create a clean, responsive web interface. And as you see, the text, here's what it would look like. So with that, we have Bootstrap added to our application, a very simple welcome message, and a working navbar. Next up, we'll probably want to add a query and show our data. So we already have the queries and the routes created from the previous videos. The most basic one, and the first one, was getting a list of different bars. And now we'll actually show that to the user. So before we actually do that, one other change needs to be made to our angular.json file. This will be kind of like having a redirect from our ng serve command to our server, which will run on a separate terminal. That way, our user interface will be able to communicate with the server. To do that, let's go over to the angular.json file and we'll need to add a couple things. Within the serve command section, that's right over here, it should be line 54. Under options, let's create a proxy config property, and we'll say that's going to be located at proxyconf.json. Okay? And naturally, that will also mean we need to have a file called proxy.conf.json. So right-click on the Barbier Drinker UI folder, new file, and let's create that .json. And within here, we'll need to have the details for where our API is located. So if you remember from the previous videos, I suggested that we have all of our API endpoints start with /API. This is going to be convenient because now we can just say anything that starts with /API. We actually want to redirect to our server, our Python server, rather than the Angular utility. So anything that starts with /API should have a target of HTTP localhost 8080. And then we'll also add this flag, false, just in case. So here's what that file should look like. It's just JSON. And with those two files now, let's restart our Angular CLI. So ng serve. Okay, so no changes here so far, right? But now we'll have one other file. So what we'll need to do is actually create a service in order to communicate with the server-side application, and that service will handle the communication aspect of it. There is a sense of having a component and a service. So we have an overall module for routing. This is where we'll add different routes for our pages. And then we have the application, the app.component HTML, which is the overall application, but we'll have separate subcomponents. So the idea behind Angular will be having different components to reflect each individual page, and certain modular areas will become components as well, such as having a table, having a drop-down, things like that. To get started actually on this, let's do this. We'll make sure that our Jumbotron goes into a separate page instead of being in the overall application. If we have it this way, as we do now, what ends up happening is whenever we go to any page, we'll have that welcome message, and we don't want that. We only want that on the main page, the welcome page. So to do that, open up your terminal. Let's create a new instance of the terminal here and execute the command ng generate component welcome. Oh, so I got this error because the local workspace file angular.json was not found. The reason why is actually this right here. I'm not in the UI folder. So within the UI folder now, ng generate component welcome. And as you saw, the tool automatically created these files and this folder called welcome. And within there, we have the welcome component.ts and the HTML. So now if we look at the routing module, we'll need to reference that route. So within this list, let's create an element. And for that element, actually, we'll say the path is default. Oh, and by the way, in TypeScript right now, you'll get certain error squigglies like we did before. If you use double quotes for having a string, you can get rid of that by just having a single quoted string. In JavaScript and TypeScript, that's allowed. So for slash, and where the path match is full, we'll say the component we want to load is going to be the welcome component. So Visual Studio Code automatically imported this line, or imported the component by adding this line, but you should make sure you have that. It's import welcome component from welcome/welcome.component. Notice that there's no .ts here. That's because the CLI will handle that for us in terms of having the .ts or the .js. And ultimately, since the TypeScript gets converted into JavaScript, that won't be our issue. It'll be handled by the tool. So when I save that, let's see what happens. Now there's nothing over here. So invalid configuration of route here. Slash cannot be started with a slash. So let's just get rid of that slash. And everything loads up again, except now there's this, welcome works. That message came up because within our app.component.html, after the Jumbotron, we have this router-outlet component, or this element. We don't say welcome works anywhere, but we actually do. Within the welcome.component.html, we have this. So this HTML was plugged in where the router-outlet element is. That is handled by the routing. So what this shows is we actually ended up on the welcome page because of the Angular router. And now we're just going to take the Jumbotron out from the app.component and put that where the welcome works message was. So now if we go to some other page, this Jumbotron should not be visible. And we'll get to that shortly. The next step will be having the service created. So similar to creating the component, we're going to say ng generate service bars. So now we have a bars service. And over here, we're going to be creating the method that's used to make requests to the server. Before we do that, let's make sure we have the HTTP client installed, or imported rather, sorry. HTTP module, HTTP, yep. Well, here. First thing, let's go to app.module.ts, and within here, going to say common/http, and let's get the HTTP client, okay? And we'll provide this client module that we import into the import section of the ng module. Now over here we get this error, unexpected value at HTTP client imported by the module. And to resolve that, let's see what we can do. We'll go here and just let's see if restarting the Angular CLI tool helps. So notice how this is actually not what I wanted. What I wanted was the HTTP client module and then also the HTTP client. The module should be imported into the import section, and under providers we'll provide the HTTP client. What this does is it provides this HTTP client as one instance to be used throughout the whole application. Now, within the bars.service.ts file, we can import HTTP client from the file, and we'll need to make sure that we inject it into the constructor. So private, or we can make it public. Public HTTP will be like that. And now get bars, we'll say this .http.get, since we're having a get method. So the HTTP method is get, so we have to say http.get, and then the URL we're going to put is just /API/bar. And after that, we need to make sure we return this. And that'll be all for this service over there. If you want, you can go above and beyond and have an interface created called bar, and let's create some properties. Well, we'll need to make sure we import this. So name, which is a string, license, which we expect to also have as a string, city, phone, and the address, which is just adder. And now when we do get, we can say bar, it's going to be a list of bars. Okay? Now, from the welcome component, we're going to import the service we created. Bars.service, bar service, yep, and the bar interface. And now let's have this. Get bars. We'll need to inject the service into our welcome component as well. So public bar service. And this bar service get bars subscribe. This is what we use to get data. If it's successful, it will execute this function over here. This is an arrow function, so it would look something like this: data equals and then arrow. I just happen to have a nice font for my Visual Studio Code, so it comes up as a pretty icon. Now, if the data comes up, I want to show it somehow. So we're going to put that into a variable on the global scope for the component, just called bars. And it's going to be a list of bar. Now we can use this because we imported it from the bars service. And we'll say this dot bars equals the data. If there's an error, we can also have a callback function specified for that. So we'll say comma after this function, and we'll have error alert, and we'll just say could not retrieve a list of bars. So if your server isn't running or something else happens, we'll actually get that error. Now, the error coming up right now in our compiler is bars.service has no exported member bar, but that shouldn't be the case, should it? So export interface bar, get bars. If you save again, it actually compiles and now there's no error. If ever in doubt, just try to save the file again to trigger the compiler, and it'll make sure that everything's okay. If you keep getting an error message, then definitely something's wrong. Okay, now from within the welcome.component, we have a list of bars, but we're not showing that so far. So the page loads. If you go to network tab, then you'll see that the bars service bars is not actually loaded. There is no request made for the bars so far. We have a function, but it's not really being executed. So to do that, we'll put it over here. Get bars. What this does is the ng on init is executed by Angular whenever a component is first created. The constructor has the same story. So actually we could put this into the constructor. We don't need to have this ng on init function, so we'll leave it empty for now. And now what happens is we get this message, could not retrieve a list of bars. The reason why is if you look at the network tab under the developer tools, 504 status code, gateway timeout. That means it could not actually communicate with the server. So make sure that you have your Python application running as well. I'll do that right now. So from another terminal instance, I'll go into the server, make sure I have the virtual environment activated, and just say python app.py. Okay, so I have the application running on the server side on port 8080. I'm going to refresh the page, and now this /bar, or just a bar request, it has a 200, meaning it was okay. And as you saw over here on the terminal, it also showed that the request came in with a get HTTP method. If you look at the response, we also have the response coming in, just like what you saw on Postman in a previous video. Each element would be some bar. Now to show that, we'll go into the HTML for the welcome component, and we'll need to put in a table. Now, the first example I will have for a table is actually going to be using just Bootstrap, but ultimately we'll be using PrimeNG to show the table. So let's see. Tables. And here's the example we'll use. So let's copy that and just paste it here. And I'm going to close out the developer tools because we don't need that right now. Okay. So now we have just the HTML that we copied. And let's make sure that's within a container element. So it should look like this. So it's container, and then within the container div element, we'll have the table. And that just makes sure that our table is centered on the page and not just taking up the full width of the page. We don't really need the number, but we'll keep that for now, and we'll have the name of the bar and all the different properties that were available. So that's going to be name, license, city, phone, and address. So name, license, city, and address. And we'll make sure this matches up with the other. Okay. And let's get rid of all but one of the rows within the T body tag. We'll also need to have another TD element. And now here is where Angular comes in. We're going to iterate automatically over every element in our bars list and render the HTML for that. So to do that, we'll need to say star for, or actually, one moment. Yeah, so it's going to be ng4 let bar of bars. And over here, one other thing, index as I, so we can say I and bar.name. For this, we'll need to have bar.license, bar.adder, and finally bar.city. Now when I save this, as you can see, it automatically loaded everything. If there were only 5 bars, then it would only load 5. If there's more, it'll load more. But one thing, the number starts with 0 because indexes start with 0. So let's just have a +1. And now everything looks good. This is just using Bootstrap and Angular. We have yet to include PrimeNG. So let's include PrimeNG next.